Hey everyone, and welcome to this video. In this week's program walkthrough, I'm going to be talking about how you can transition your training from CrossFit into some other focus. Now, what we're starting to see a lot more of is people starting to do different types of events, people starting to do things like Hyrox, take up things like long distance running, and then also some people moving into strength sports. And I'm going to go over a couple of different scenarios that will cover all three of those. Two of the situations that I'm going to talk about are actually programs that I've actually transitioned in my coaching. So I'll be showing you actual programs that I've been writing recently. And I'll sort of tell you how I moved from one week to the next week, making that switch, and sort of talk about some of the things that I was thinking about whilst doing that, some of the things that I wanted to keep the same, and then also talk about some of the newer inclusions. So we'll be going over that, and then at the end I'll cover a little bit more of just a broad idea of how you could transition a program that's a purely CrossFit program focused on competing in CrossFit, and how we could transition that more towards someone doing a Hyrox, and what that might look like if, say, for example, they are 12 weeks away from a Hyrox event, or whether they are 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks, etc. So we'll go through the different phases there. So one of the main ideas that I'm going to be talking about today is this idea of sort of not making too much change. And I think that quite often what can happen is in our training, we might be in a position where we feel very motivated to make big changes in our training, but sometimes it's not always the best thing to do. And part of that is just because every sort of major shift that you have within your training, it can take a bit of time for you to get some momentum with the training. It's not like you're sort of shocking the body or anything like that, but I just think experientially, like, you will have to get used to the progressions. You will have to sort of start from scratch on a lot of different things. And what can end up happening is you lose momentum with some of the things that you've actually been working on. And when you are making these changes and making these shifts, you don't necessarily have to change everything in your program. So I think sometimes our motivation to make these big rash changes and that type of stuff, I think sometimes we've got to be careful with those, and we've got to make sure that we are making smaller changes and looking at it a little bit more long term and thinking, okay, what does this look like in several weeks' time? One thing you might find, and one of the things I've found with moving from training focus to training focus when I was competing in CrossFit, is that you've gone through a strength cycle, and then you go into a conditioning phase, and then in that first week it's just like a real kick in the ass. You're just not used to it, you're suffering through the training, and you could be actually just wasting a little bit of your time, where it could have been better for you to make that transition over a number of weeks. I actually do remember coming back on like a couple of different seasons I was doing, coming back from having like a break over the Christmas period, and then last week of December, first week of January, starting what was considered like open prep, and just always those first couple of weeks of doing open prep were just like a real kick in the teeth, because you're going from more of like a development phase of training where you're working on developing your skills, your strength, and that type of stuff, and then you're moving into a more preparatory phase of training where you are actually starting to make things a little bit more contextual to competition. We will actually experience these changes in our training. I think it's unavoidable, but we just want to try to manage it as best as we can. So let's have a look at some of these programs. So this first example is basically one of my athletes has just wanted to move away from CrossFit and just wanted to move in more into what he's calling hybrid training. So focusing on long distance running and keeping some decent levels of strength. He's wanted to take out the Olympic weightlifting, a lot of the technical gymnastics, and just sort of followed a bit more of a simpler program. And this is something that I've personally done with my programming in the past as well. Sometimes it can be quite nice to actually just, rather than spinning all these plates at once, it can be nice just to say, okay, I've got 2 or 3 different focuses, and my training is going in that direction. So the main thing I want to highlight is the conditioning. So in this final week of this block, he's going from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 conditioning days. So every typical CrossFit program, every sort of session's finishing with some conditioning. Now, one of those was only devoted to running, which was this piece here. So 24 minutes of running, of bike, ski erg, and running. But generally, over the last several months, his Tuesday sessions have been more focused on running. And then on occasion, he's just done like a random run on the weekend. But he's only had this one exposure to running per week. And then in terms of his conditioning, the real hard conditioning is sort of happening on the Monday and then also on the Saturday. And I tend to work off a bit of what I would consider like a high-low sequence or a polarizing sequence. So I don't like to stack, two really hard training days or two very similar training days next to each other. I try to create some more of a waving approach throughout the week. So moving into his program, the conversation was, okay, what do you have access to within your programming? And, in terms of running. And he expressed interest in running 3 times a week and maybe adding in some running into some conditioning that he would do in the gym as well. So upping that to 4 exposures per week, but maybe having, like 3 bigger sessions. And moving from 1 running exposure per week, sometimes 2, like straight into 3, that can be a big ask. And what I said to him was that, okay, well, let's have Tuesdays and Fridays as your big running days. And we'll just leave it at that to start off with. Because let's say, for example, he did actually start to do 3 days a week of running. The first couple of weeks were fine. And then he started to notice that he was just getting some soreness in his lower leg. And then it starts to turn into some, mild shin splints, plantar fasciitis, or whatever it is. If we were to go into that, then it means he's going to be coming away from his running because those issues can be quite hard to rehab and get back into the thing that you're actually wanting to do. So it's just not a smart or realistic decision to move from that sort of 1 time a week of running into 3 or more times a week of running. So we're sticking with the 2 exposures per week. And one of the things that we'll look to do in the coming weeks is just only increase his total running volume by about 10% week on week. There might be times when he's just sort of staying at the same volume. And his running is for the Tuesday session, it's a little bit similar. We're just taking out the other machines, but he's working on sort of these shorter durations, more interval based, more pacing work. And then for the Friday, he's doing just a long distance run. And this is what I'm sort of considering to be the same as his like old Saturday sessions where he would do a CrossFit throwdown workout. We're just moving that now, and he's doing that for a run instead. Okay, so second example is going to be this athlete here just wanted to move into a very strength biased and strength heavy program. Still want to do some CrossFit. So what I'm going to talk about is mainly just the exposure to the amount of, let me just delete this, some secret things there. No. But yeah, I'll talk about the exposures of the snatch and clean and jerk, and just what we're looking to do from there. So when he was doing his just sort of pure, focusing more on his CrossFit, he had Monday is the main snatch session, Tuesday is the main jerk session, Wednesday is the main clean session, and then Friday he would do 1 heavy lift, and then he would do barbell cycling on the other variation. So on this week he was doing a heavy clean and jerk complex, and then he was going into some touch and go power snatches after that. What we've done moving into his weightlifting program is we've just added in, we've kept Monday as the snatch day, Tuesday as the jerk day, Wednesday as the clean day. Friday he's doing both lifts, so we're having a little bit more of a, this is typically how weightlifters are training. They usually have a day which is they're doing both lifts back to back, and this is usually the day where they're going to be going heavy. So he's still got this main structure, but the main changes are I wanted to increase the amount of lighter pulling from the floor, and then also the amount of practice that you got with the snatch. Generally speaking, practicing the snatch a little bit more often, it can just have that's sort of the way to go about it. For the clean and jerk, it's a little bit more strength based, so you don't necessarily need to touch it as often, but you need to keep your strength levels a little bit higher. So for the Monday session, we moved from like a hang snatch into full snatch, so one rep from the floor in the complex. We moved the Monday piece to just doing hang work, and then there is some snatch pulls to do afterwards. But the snatch pulls are not going to be too heavy. It's just adding 5 to 10 kgs on to the working weights from the hang variation beforehand, and then going into just 2 sets for the first week, just to get a little bit extra work from the floor. And then on the Wednesday, there is a muscle snatch variation. Again, only 3 sets, 3 reps. We're not looking at anything to be super heavy here. The variation itself is going to be quite weight limiting. So what we're trying to do with this program is sort of just thread in a little bit more volume, but not too much. And just trying to make things a little bit more contextual and a little bit more specific to weightlifting in terms of trying to bring up those numbers. So this is where, you're going to add in a little bit of pull work here. You're going to add in, maybe some muscle snatches or some tool snatch as a bit of a primer. But the key is if you're going from so if you're going from, in this week here, we have 2 exposures to the snatch, the clean, and also the jerk. Bearing in mind, one of those exposures on the clean and jerk is the complex itself. So we have 2 exposures per week. Moving into the following week, we have, for the jerk, we have sort of 2 jerk exposures, 2 clean exposures, and we have 3 snatch exposures. And then from here, potentially, we might increase and add another jerk exposure. We probably keep the clean exposures as they are, and I think, squats and pulls are some tools you can use to try and bring that up. But again, we're not wanting to see too much of a change here in terms of his conditioning and stuff like that. The conditioning moved from a lot more harder CrossFit, harder intervals, that type of stuff, and he moved more into just general fitness, a lot lower volume, in that he's still doing CrossFit, he's still practicing his skills, but he's just not necessarily spending half an hour going through a conditioning progression. And we're using a little bit more of that a lot of time to go through some of those little extras and obviously the increase of exposure. So if you are going to be moving from a CrossFit program more into a weightlifting program, it doesn't necessarily need to be just a ton more snatch and clean and jerk. What you can do is just start to get practice through using other variations as well. Finally, what I'm going to talk about now is just 4 stages of moving someone from a CrossFit program into a Hyrox program. 3 stages. So this is their CrossFit program. I'm just going to talk specifically about the conditioning. So on the Monday, typical CrossFit workout, let's call it a 10-minute AMRAP of, some barbell gymnastics and rowing couplet. Then we have a mixed aerobic workout. So this is going to be similar to Hyrox. Think wall balls, kettlebell swings, box jump overs, burpees, that type of stuff. Things that you're able to keep good high turnover with. Tough mixed intervals. So this could be something like, 2 minutes on, 1 minute off. And in the 2 minutes, you're doing an AMRAP of, 2 or 3 movements. And then you get in that minute rest, working a bit harder than you would do when you do a CrossFit workout. Then we have a skill-based workout. And then we have the CrossFit Throwdown that I generally program as the last day of programs, last day for people, and just an opportunity to practice your skills. This individual then says, hey, I want to do a Hyrox event. So it's like, okay, well, what can we do? Rather than just turning everything into more of a Hyrox-based program, doing loads of running and all this type of stuff, we would keep all the strength work the same, or the general balance of the strength work. The mixed aerobic work, the stuff that was similar to Hyrox, we would just turn that into Hyrox-specific prep. And then for the CrossFit Throwdown, which was usually just a real hard day of conditioning as well, we'd move that into Hyrox practice. So then the transition from this week into this week seems a little bit more seamless and is a little bit easier to manage for the athlete. Then moving into the following week, what we would do is we'd say, okay, well, 50% of Hyrox is running. So we would add in some running intervals there. And we'd take out those tough mixed intervals and we put the running intervals. And I would recommend doing the running intervals or something along those lines the day before a rest day, just because it can take quite a lot out of you if you're a CrossFitter. And then finally, you're looking at a complete overhaul of the conditioning, more focused towards Hyrox. And then in this situation, it might be you have some Hyrox specific prep on the Monday, you do some easy aerobic work on the Tuesday, running intervals on the Wednesday. So we have harder intensity here on the Monday, easier intensity here on the Tuesday, and then harder intensity here on the Wednesday. And that's just because running just generally takes it out more than you, takes more out of you than going through, row, ski erg, and assault bike. Then for the Friday, we do some sled-based conditioning. This is generally the thing that trips up a lot of people if you're not used to it. And then they will go through their Hyrox practice. And what you could do is, say, for example, this was week 0. This is the program they were doing before. We will go through this structure for 3 weeks, this structure for 3 weeks, this structure for 3 weeks, this structure, and you're looking at a 10-week preparation period, and you would be good to go for a Hyrox competition, and you would feel very prepared, and you wouldn't necessarily have to overhaul the whole program from the get-go. So hopefully you got some ideas there on how to potentially make a transition. Remember, we want those changes to be as seamless as they can. There is going to be a bit of a transition phase, and it's always going to be something you might need to get a bit used to, but we want to try to keep our training productive, and the way we do that is trying to keep the programming and the structure as similar as possible, moving from week to week, phase to phase, and that type of stuff. Obviously making our changes, adding in variation as we need to, but just not doing it too much. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments, and thank you for watching.